All right, let's jump into this deep dive and head straight to Kenya.
Sounds good.
We're tackling the world of charitable giving there.
Okay.
And specifically some new tax regulations that are kind of shaking things up for both organizations and,
Right.
people who are donating.
Absolutely, yeah.
Kenya updated these regulations pretty recently, actually.
Oh, wow.
Just last year in 2024.
So very new.
We're really kind of on the cutting edge here,
Yeah.
trying to understand how they're impacting giving in Kenya.
I think what's really interesting is these changes go beyond just like the technical stuff.
Yeah.
They're bringing up these big questions about finding that balance between promoting generosity and, keeping things accountable.
Right.
That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Exactly.
Using insights from income tax, donations, and charitable organizations exemption regulations 2024. Quite a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
It's a document put together by Fiscus Consulting Limited,
Okay.
which is a Kenyan tax consulting firm.
Great. So that's our main source material today.
That's it. Yep.
By the end of this, hopefully everyone listening will have a really solid grasp of these new regulations and what they mean, whether they're a donor or maybe even thinking about starting a charitable organization themselves.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
How does an organization in Kenya even get that charitable label?
Right.
Is it just like about having a good cause?
Well, not quite. It's not that straightforward.
Okay.
Kenya has this system with 3 main tests that organizations have to pass
Okay.
to be considered charitable.
Okay.
So first, there's the organizational test.
All right. Organizational test number 1.
And this one really zeroes in on the organization's core goals.
Okay.
They need to be purely charitable. So no one is personally profiting.
Got it. So it's like making sure the people starting it aren't
Exactly.
running some kind of side hustle disguised as a charity.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. It's all about genuine commitment to the cause.
Okay, so that's test number 1. What's next?
Then we've got the operational test.
Okay.
This one digs into what the organization is actually doing.
Right.
Their activities need to line up directly with their stated purpose.
So they can't just talk the talk, they have to actually walk the walk.
Exactly.
Like they say they're all about education.
Yeah.
They can't just throw a big fancy fundraising gala
Right.
and call it a day.
Exactly. They need to be actively doing educational projects,
They need to be making a real difference.
Yep.
Okay, so 2 down, 1 to go.
All right. And lastly, there's the public benefit test.
Okay.
This one ensures that they're truly working for the greater good, not just the interests of like a small group
Right.
or a family.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's like a sports team, I'm thinking. To even play, they have to follow the rules of the game, right?
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So these tests are kind of like the rules of the game
Yeah.
for Kenyan charities to make sure they're playing fair and serving their communities.
Exactly. And they're super important for preventing those fake organizations that just want to take advantage of tax breaks.
So it's about accountability.
Exactly. Accountability and transparency, very important.
Okay, so we've got these tests.
Yeah.
But what exactly are the specific things Kenya considers charitable?
Right.
What activities fit that bill?
Well, Kenya lays these out in something called Rule 9.
Rule 9. Okay.
This list clarifies what activities qualify for tax exemption
Okay.
and gives these organizations a framework to work within.
Got it.
So some of the recognized purposes include things like advancing religion, advancing education, relieving poverty, and relieving public distress.
So if an organization wanted to build a school,
Right.
that would fall under advancing education.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or if they set up a food bank
Yeah.
to help people who are struggling with food, that would be relieving poverty.
Exactly. Those are great examples. Having those concrete scenarios really helps organizations see how their work directly links to these approved charitable purposes.
That makes sense. Now, here's something I think a lot of people might be wondering about.
Yeah.
What happens when these organizations have leftover funds?
Okay.
Can they just sit on a pile of cash? I feel like that wouldn't go over very well with donors who expect their money to be actively used.
You're absolutely right. And the regulations address that head on.
Okay, good.
Rule 16, which is all about surplus funds, says that they can keep some funds, but there's a catch.
Okay.
If the amount is more than 15% of their total funds for 3 years in a row, they've got to use it for their charitable purpose.
Oh, okay. So no hoarding cash just in case.
Exactly.
It has to be actively working towards their goals.
It needs to be making a real difference, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that donors really care about, knowing that their money is being used effectively.
Absolutely. Transparency is key when it comes to building that trust between donors and these organizations.
So let's say an organization ticks all the boxes.
Okay.
They've passed the tests, and their charitable purpose is crystal clear. What's next for them?
Yeah.
How do they actually apply for that tax exemption?
Well, it all comes down to Rule 17, which outlines the documents they need.
Rule 17.
Some are pretty standard, like copies of their registration documents and their audited financial statements.
Right.
But there are a couple that are especially interesting.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
One is what's called an impact report.
Okay.
This report needs to showcase their activities and the impact they've had. Not just what they've done in the past, but what they're doing right now and what they plan for the future.
Wow, so they're really painting a full picture.
Exactly. And then they also need a letter from the county commissioner.
Okay.
This letter details what the organization is all about and what they do, giving them that extra layer of verification from a local authority.
So it's not just the organization's word. There's some external validation happening there.
Exactly.
It sounds like they're really trying to vet these organizations.
Yeah. These requirements really stress transparency and accountability, which are so important for making sure those tax benefits are going to the right places.
Absolutely. So they've gathered all these documents
Yeah.
and submitted their application. Now, how long do they typically have to wait to hear back?
Well, according to Rule 18, if their application is all good and it meets all the requirements, they should get their certificate within 60 days. And the great thing is, once they get it, it's valid for a full 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So no need to go through this whole thing every year.
Exactly.
But what happens if their application is denied? What options do they have then?
That's covered too. The commissioner has to let them know in writing, clearly explaining why it was denied.
Okay.
And importantly, there's a system for appeals.
So it's not a dead end.
Yeah.
They have a chance to make their case.
Exactly. Exactly. This emphasis on due process is super important for ensuring things are fair and giving organizations a chance to speak up for themselves. It recognizes that sometimes there can be misunderstandings or situations where more information could change the outcome.
All right, so let's say an organization goes through all this, gets their tax-exempt status. Does that mean they're done with taxes altogether?
Not entirely. Rule 19 stresses that they still need to file those yearly tax returns.
Oh, really? Even if they don't owe any taxes?
Even then, yeah. It's all about keeping things transparent.
Okay, so it's like a regular checkup.
Exactly.
But there's a twist here, right?
Yes, there is.
Something about unrelated business. What's that all about?
You're right. Sometimes charities get involved in activities that bring in money,
Okay.
but aren't directly related to their main charitable goal.
Okay.
That's what they call unrelated business.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Imagine a charitable organization that sets up a bakery.
Oh.
They sell bread and pastries, and all the profits go back into their charitable work.
Right, so it's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
They're being creative to bring in more money for their mission.
Exactly. But the regulations require them to get a separate KRA PIN, which is their tax ID number,
Okay,
specifically for that unrelated business income.
got it. So keep those funds separate and accounted for?
Precisely. It's all about clarity and showing that they're handling money responsibly.
Okay, so it sounds like even with that tax-exempt status, there are still rules to follow. It's not a free pass.
Exactly. Tax exemption definitely comes with responsibilities.
Speaking of responsibilities, are there situations where an organization could actually lose their tax-exempt status?
Absolutely, yeah. Rule 20 outlines the reasons why it could be revoked,
Okay.
and it's something organizations really need to pay attention to.
So what are some of the things that could lead to that?
One of the most common is consistently failing to follow the regulations.
Okay.
That could be anything from not turning in reports on time
Right.
to doing things that go against the rules for their charitable purpose.
Uh-huh.
Another reason is straying from their own governing documents, like their constitution or founding charter.
So if they're not playing by the rules or go off track from their original mission, there are consequences.
Exactly. It's a system of checks and balances to make sure they're staying true to their mission and operating ethically.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, from those core tests of charitable status to the potential problems organizations need to avoid.
Yeah,
It seems like Kenya is taking a very structured approach to regulating this sector.
absolutely.
But what about the people who are actually giving to these organizations?
Right.
What do they need to know about these new regulations?
That's a great question, and it's what we'll focus on next. The regulations have specific rules for donors, especially those who want to claim their donations as tax deductions.
Oh, yeah. That tax deduction is a big factor for a lot of people. So stay tuned, everyone, as we look at these regulations from the donor's perspective.
Absolutely. All right, welcome back. We've just dipped our toes into these Kenyan charitable giving regulations.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind.
And there's so much more to uncover about what this all means for both organizations and, of course, those who support them.
Absolutely. Let's do a quick recap,
Okay.
just for everyone listening, especially those involved with charities in Kenya. What are the absolute must-knows about these new rules?
Okay, so here's the cheat sheet.
All right, lay it on me.
First up, organizations need to be super clear about their charitable purpose and make sure it fits into one of those 4 recognized categories.
Right. Those 4 categories.
Remember, those were advancement of religion, advancement of education, relief of poverty, or relief of public distress.
Got it.
If they go outside those lines, that could lead to problems later on.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just say you fit into one of those categories.
Right.
You need to pass those 3 key tests: organizational, operational, and public benefit.
Exactly. It's like a triple check.
Right.
To make sure they're walking the walk.
They're the real deal.
Exactly. And even if they get that tax-exempt status, it's not a free pass to ignore taxes completely.
Right.
They still got to file those annual tax returns, even if they don't owe any taxes. It's all about transparency.
Transparency, key takeaway.
Oh, sure.
Okay, and if a charity gets creative with their fundraising and does what we call unrelated business stuff, they need to remember that separate KRAP kin for those unrelated business activities.
Absolutely. Keep those funds separate, track them carefully.
Keep it all clean.
Ah.
Okay, so that's for the organizations.
Right.
What about the people who want to donate to Kenyan charities?
Yeah, good question.
What should they keep in mind with these new rules?
Documentation is key here. Make sure you have all the paperwork.
Okay.
Like a receipt from the organization, approved project proposals, budgets, and a copy of their exemption certificate.
Okay.
It's all about making sure your money is going to a legit organization, one that's properly registered.
Makes sense. Due diligence.
Absolutely. And donors need to remember that donations, they can't be a way to get personal benefits or act as a sneaky loan. It has to be a genuine gift, no strings attached.
Right. It has to be about the cause.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Do your homework before you donate. Check if the organization is the real deal, if they're registered, and if they're actually doing what they say they are.
Right. Be an informed giver. Okay. One thing that really stood out to me about these regulations is this big emphasis on transparency and accountability. It seems like Kenya's trying to build a system where donors and charities really trust each other.
That's a really sharp observation.
Thanks.
Transparency is absolutely critical here. Donors need to know their money's being used well.
Right.
And organizations need to show they're operating honestly. These regulations create a framework for that.
Yeah, and I imagine that this focus on transparency also helps prevent fraud, right?
Exactly. It makes it much harder for those with bad intentions to slip through.
Like a security system. Doesn't eliminate risk, but makes things safer. Now, I'm curious about the bigger picture.
Okay.
What kind of long-term impact could these regulations have on charitable giving in Kenya?
It's a great question. It's something that experts are debating.
Okay.
On the one hand, these regulations could create a much stronger charitable sector in Kenya. With clear rules and more transparency, organizations have a reason to be more strategic, more efficient.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about making the whole sector better.
Exactly. It encourages them to use best practices, to have strong governance structures, and to improve their fundraising.
But I could also see these regulations being a challenge, especially for those smaller grassroots organizations.
That's a valid concern.
They often have limited resources and might find it really hard to handle these new requirements.
Right. While larger organizations have the infrastructure to adapt, smaller groups, especially those really connected to their communities, might struggle to keep up.
It's like a David and Goliath situation.
Exactly.
And that would be a shame because those grassroots organizations do such important work.
They really do. They're often the ones addressing those hyperlocal needs, reaching those often overlooked communities. They're adaptable. and they
Yeah.
really understand the specific challenges people face.
That are on the ground?
Exactly. So it's really important for policymakers to think about the unintended consequences of these regulations, and find ways to help those smaller organizations. Maybe they could have support programs or simplified reporting just for them.
Yeah, making sure the regulations don't accidentally make it harder for the little guys.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between accountability
Yeah,
and encouraging a diverse and active charitable scene.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Another concern is that these regulations might lead to more bureaucracy, more administrative costs.
That's a good point.
I imagine that navigating all these new rules could mean more paperwork for organizations,
Yeah.
more meetings, maybe even needing to hire more staff or consultants.
Right. And those costs can really add up and potentially take away money from the actual charitable work.
Yeah, not ideal. It's a tough balance.
It is. It's a delicate balance between accountability and keeping those administrative burdens low.
And it's a complex problem with no easy answers.
But it's important to remember that Kenya isn't alone in this.
You're right.
Governments all over the world are trying to figure out how to best regulate charitable giving, how to encourage transparency,
Yeah.
and how to prevent abuse.
It's a global trend,
Yeah.
and there's no one perfect solution. Every country has to come up with regulations that work for them, considering their own unique challenges and opportunities.
What can Kenya learn from other countries that have done similar things?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot to learn from others' experiences. For example, some countries have set up independent bodies.
Specifically to watch over the charitable sector.
So like a dedicated watchdog focused on ethical conduct and making sure everyone followed the rules.
Exactly. These bodies are key for maintaining public trust and giving guidance to organizations as they figure out these complex regulations. They also have the power to investigate
Right?
and hold organizations accountable.
That makes a lot of sense.
Another thing I've seen is something called tiered reporting systems.
Okay.
This means smaller organizations with fewer resources
Yeah.
would have simpler reporting,
Okay.
while larger organizations with more capacity
Mhm.
would have more detailed requirements.
So it recognizes that not every organization is the same.
Precisely. It's about making the rules fit the specific needs of different types of organizations.
Making it fair. It seems like Kenya is at a really important point, shaping the future of charitable giving.
It really does.
There are opportunities to learn from other countries, to adjust and to refine these regulations, to create a system that really works for everyone.
I completely agree.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I think it's clear that Kenya is starting a new chapter in how they approach charitable giving.
It is.
These new regulations could really change things.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next few years.
Absolutely. A dynamic and evolving landscape. It's important for everyone involved to stay informed, to stay engaged,
Right.
and to commit to building a thriving, impactful charitable sector in Kenya.
And on that note, we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to dive deeper into the details of these regulations, I highly recommend checking out the full document from Fiscus Consulting Limited.
It's a great resource.
You can find their contact info in the source material we provided.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the changing world of charitable giving in Kenya.
My pleasure.
We hope you've learned some valuable insights and maybe have a new appreciation for the amazing work that these organizations are doing.
Absolutely. It's been great discussing this with you.
Yeah, likewise. Until next time. All right, welcome back to our deep dive. We've spent quite a bit of time unpacking the technical side of these new tax regulations in Kenya.
We have, haven't we?
Explored the pros, the cons, and even looked at how Kenya's approach compares to what's happening globally.
It's been a pretty comprehensive look.
But now I think it's time to shift gears a bit
Okay.
and explore the human element of all of this.
I agree. At the end of the day, we're talking about real people here. The individuals who are pouring their heart and soul into these charitable causes, and of course, the communities they're working so hard to support. So yeah, let's dive into how these regulations are actually playing out in the real world.
Exactly. Let's start with the potential positives. I can definitely see how these regulations could contribute to a more robust and effective charitable sector in Kenya. For example, that emphasis on transparency and accountability, I think, could really strengthen the trust between donors and organizations.
Absolutely. When donors feel confident that their money is being used responsibly and effectively, they're naturally more inclined to give generously and even encourage others to do the same. It creates a really positive cycle.
Yeah, it's like planting a seed that grows into a beautiful garden. That increased trust leads to more financial support. Organizations can expand their programs, reach more people, and ultimately have a bigger impact.
Precisely. Amplifying the impact of charitable giving. These regulations also encourage a more professional approach within the sector. By setting these clear standards, organizations are encouraged to adopt best practices, improve their governance, and really refine their fundraising strategies.
So it's not just about checking boxes and following the rules. It's about raising the bar for the entire sector.
Exactly, moving beyond those ad hoc approaches. Yeah. And embracing a more strategic, impactful way of working.
Now, I don't want to be all sunshine and rainbows here.
Right.
We've got to acknowledge there could be some downsides to these regulations as well.
Of course, yeah.
We talked earlier about the potential burden on smaller grassroots organizations. I think that's a valid concern for many in the sector.
Definitely. These smaller organizations, they're often operating with really limited resources.
Right.
Tight budgets, maybe not a lot of administrative help. Meeting those new reporting requirements,
Yeah.
navigating those complex tax systems, that could be really tough.
It's almost like asking someone who's used to running a marathon
Yeah.
to suddenly compete in a triathlon. Both tests of endurance, but a whole different skill set.
That's a great analogy. And, these smaller organizations, they play such an important role.
Yeah.
Addressing those really specific local needs, reaching those marginalized communities, and empowering people at a grassroots level.
They're often so deeply connected to the communities they serve, with a much better understanding of the challenges than maybe larger organizations might have.
Exactly. So there is a risk that these regulations, despite the good intentions, could stifle innovation and limit the variety of voices within the charitable sector.
It's like pruning a tree too much,
Yeah.
You might end up with something neater,
Yeah.
but you risk losing some of that unique character and vibrancy.
A very poetic way to put it. It's about finding that balance, right? Regulation is important, but so is having a diverse, thriving network of charitable organizations.
Absolutely. Policymakers really need to think about those unintended consequences and find ways to lighten the load for those smaller groups. Maybe targeted support programs or simpler reporting just for them.
Exactly. Making sure those regulations don't create unnecessary obstacles for people who are passionate about making a difference, but maybe lack the resources to navigate all the new complexities.
Another thing we discussed was the potential for more bureaucracy and increased administrative costs for all organizations, really.
Yeah, that's a real concern.
All those new requirements could translate into more paperwork, more meetings, maybe even a need to bring in extra staff or consultants.
And those costs can quickly add up.
Yeah.
Potentially diverting funds away from those core activities that the donors were hoping to support. It's a tricky balance.
It's like adding more weight to a hiker's backpack. They might be more prepared,
Right.
but it's going to make the climb a lot harder.
I like that analogy. And it underscores the need to constantly evaluate and adapt.
Yeah.
As these regulations are rolled out, it's essential to monitor their impact, get feedback from the organizations, and tweak things as needed.
It's a process.
Yeah.
Finding that sweet spot where you've got accountability without stifling the energy and effectiveness of the sector.
Absolutely.
Now, let's think about the people who ultimately benefit from all of this.
Okay.
How are these regulations likely to impact the lives of those being served by these charitable efforts?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? After all, the whole point of all this is to make sure charitable organizations are better equipped to serve their communities and make a positive difference.
Exactly. So what are some of the potential benefits for those on the receiving end?
Well, I think that increased transparency could lead to more informed giving.
Okay.
With clearer information about how organizations work and where the money goes, donors can be more selective about which causes they support.
So it empowers donors to be more involved and really make sure their contributions match their values and have the impact they're looking for.
Exactly. It goes beyond just writing a check. It's about understanding the organization's work and feeling connected to their mission.
Another potential benefit is that this push for greater accountability could lead to more efficient and effective service delivery.
Right. With stricter oversight and reporting, organizations are going to be motivated to streamline their operations, avoid waste, and make sure their programs are truly delivering.
So every shilling donated is used wisely, and the impact is maximized. Okay, but we've got to be realistic here.
Of course.
There are potential downsides too, right?
Absolutely. If this administrative burden becomes too much, organizations might have to cut back on programs,
No.
or services.
Which ultimately impacts the communities they serve.
Exactly. They might be spending more time on compliance and less time delivering essential services.
And if those smaller grassroots organizations struggle to adapt,
Yeah,
it could limit access to those vital services for the people who need them most.
that's a crucial point. We have to make sure these regulations don't accidentally make things worse for those who are already vulnerable.
It's a complex issue with no simple solutions. It's about finding a way to balance regulation, effectiveness,
Yeah.
and meeting the needs of the most vulnerable in society.
And it really highlights the importance of open communication and collaboration between policymakers, organizations, and the communities they serve. It's about working together to build a system that truly supports the amazing work happening in Kenya's charitable sector.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, and I think it's safe to say that Kenya is at a turning point when it comes to charitable giving. These new regulations have the potential to reshape the sector in some pretty profound ways. It'll be interesting to see what the next few years bring.
Absolutely, a dynamic and evolving landscape. It's so important for everyone to stay informed, stay involved, and work together to build a thriving and impactful charitable sector in Kenya.
And to wrap things up, I want to remind our listeners that we've only scratched the surface here. If anyone wants to delve deeper, explore the nuances of these regulations, I highly recommend taking a look at the full document from Fiscus Consulting Limited. You can find their contact info in the source material we linked.
It's an excellent resource for anyone who wants to really understand these regulations and their potential impact.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of charitable giving in Kenya. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and maybe a newfound appreciation for the incredible work being done by these organizations.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. Until next time.